Welcome to the second episode of Season 2 on Tell My Story. In this podcast, we will highlight and discuss the unique experiences of our guest speakers throughout these unprecedented circumstances during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm your host, Arshia, and today we are excited to have Samantha Ouyang, 17-year-old from Toronto, also known as the founder of international nonprofit organization Superposition Toronto. For those who don't know about Superposition Toronto, its purpose is to bridge the gender gap in STEM, standing for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, through opportunities and community involvement. Which is why, before we head into the questions, I would like to thank Samantha and everyone else out there bridging these gaps and promoting equality, because together we are so much stronger. All right, so starting with the first question, how did you become interested in the field of STEM, and what part of STEM interests you the most?
Well, I think I've always just been a really curious person, like even at birth. When I was like 6 years old, I would just spend hours staring at maps. My mom bought this one map from Dollarama, world map, and I just spent hours just looking at it and marking down all the different cool places. I did some really questionable things as well with my curiosity. I think one time when I was 12 years old, I decided to have like a 6-volt battery connected to a 1.5 volts LED. And I did that on purpose just so I could burn the bulb and see what it would smell like. So my curiosity has brought me down some weird paths, I think. But I think having an interest in the field of STEM is just and wanting to push the boundaries of science. And just see what kind of discoveries can be made. And given that things are always changing in the field of STEM, we're always making new discoveries. I think that's what interests me the most. And I guess more specifically in the different branches of STEM, I'm most interested in technology and engineering the most, because I think it's in these sorts of in these two branches where I think the most development will be made in the up and coming years.
Wow, that's really amazing. And it's really interesting the way you got interested into the field of STEM. Next question. Describe the story of your nonprofit, how it started, and also feel free to share some excerpts of your thought process and inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just to give a little bit of context, I'm going to explain a little bit more about my own backstory. So going into high school, I was pretty excited, to be honest. It was going to be a whole new experience. I'd have access to so many different opportunities, or so I thought. So once I got into high school, I kind of realized that, at least in my high school, my kind of interests were a little bit overshadowed. So there weren't too many tech and engineering people. It was more so focused on business and medicine. So the tech community there already felt pretty small. And there are a lot of different examples of this, but we had a pretty underfunded robotics team. Our guidance counselors were telling us to switch out of biology to take physics because tech and engineering wasn't as popular. And ended up being pretty isolated as well because of different scheduling issues. So in order to take the computer science classes that I wanted to, that meant that in grade 9, I ended up being the only girl in grade 9 in my lunch period. And as well in grade 10, I took another computer science class, and I was the only girl in my grade that took that class. So it was pretty isolating, but I think overall I just felt really frustrated by that sort of lack of support from my school. And eventually, being with the sorts of people who were interested in these areas, they were usually the guys in my grade. And we ended up becoming friends, but I kind of realized a number of times that they would say some pretty interesting things. Interesting, not in a good way. Sometimes they kind of doubted my skills, and they discredited some of my achievements. Oh, that's just like you won like a girls only award kind of thing. And sometimes they just said like blatantly degrading comments without thinking. And it just caught me so off guard that I didn't even know how to respond. So I think it's in these sorts of situations where I kind of felt like I got that imposter syndrome, and I felt that I was just so alone on my own journey, and I had almost no support in pursuing my interests. And I felt like I wasn't able to reach my full potential. And so given that context, I kind of eventually realized that school wasn't ever going to be able to provide the support that I needed to further my interest in STEM and actually do things and build certain things or learn in different knowledge beyond the curriculum. And so I think that was my main motivation in starting Superposition Toronto, to kind of create what I always wanted when I was going into high school. First of all, creating that community that I just never really got from at high school because it was just so overshadowed, and there weren't many other girls that were interested in the same things that I was. And second of all, creating the opportunities and creating that support of being able to actually pursue your interests without that sort of doubt constantly clawing at you.
Wow, that's really inspiring to hear. Thank you. Next question. How has creating Superposition Toronto impacted you as a person?
Well, I think Superposition Toronto has been such an integral part of my life over the past year or so. And it's definitely changed me as a person for the better, of course. I think definitely as a leader, just all the skills you gain with having to lead a group of individuals and having being able to exercise control, but also giving them the freedom to have their own creativity there as well, and being able to have a good balance of that and understanding how to navigate all of that, being able to delegate tasks properly, and being able to put my trust in my team members as well, which is something I also struggled with, especially, for me, I had a lot of trust issues from pretty terrible group experiences back in elementary school. So that was something I also had to learn. I think as well, developing a sort of entrepreneurial thinking and creativity, and just constantly thinking of new ways to grow the organization, to reach more people as well. But I think one of the biggest ways it's impacted me is just realizing that there really are no limits to what's possible if you put your mind to something. So Superposition Toronto is something I really poured my heart into over the past year. I think even just when I started, I was already working easily 3 hours a day right from its launch. And I remember just doing all the documentation, setting everything up, and then eventually getting to the exec interviews. I did like 11 hours of interviews in the span of 3 days, and I thought that was a lot. But of course, as we got bigger and bigger, we ended up doing that. It kind of seems inconsequential when you compare it to the other things that we've done and the amount of hours I've put into Superposition Toronto. I think over the past summer in running our hackathon, there were some days where I probably spent easily 12 hours in one day just running things related to Superposition Toronto. And I think with all that work that I've put into it, you do see the fruits of your effort. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things as well, aside from just seeing the impact that you're able to create in your community.
That's really amazing. So, since the COVID-19 pandemic, what are some challenges you have faced pertaining to the organization and your own life?
Well, of course, COVID has been difficult for everyone. There's no doubt about that. And it's definitely a huge change. But I think for us, it actually presented a huge opportunity as well. Of course, we'd love to have in-person events. I mean, in-person hackathons are always just an incredible experience. And I say that speaking from personal experience as well. But having all of our events essentially be virtual has also allowed us to reach so many more people. I mean, if you think about it, the only way we're actually able to reach individuals in 80 different countries from all around the world is because our events were virtual. They're open to anyone. Whereas I think if COVID had never happened, we would have had all our events be in person, but we'd only be able to impact really individuals from the Toronto area, and we're within driving distance. So I think that was something that was only really possible because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think on a personal level, I found that for the first month, COVID just really had me reflect on life, and I was in a little bit of an awkward place. But COVID, I think overall has just really allowed me to become a better person, gain so much more self-awareness. And I think a lot of that is from being able to physically detach myself from all the other different factors and all the different things that were at play in my life before, not having to face any of these things that I had to constantly look at and see myself next to, just really gave me the opportunity to sit with myself and reflect on my own life without these external influences. And I think that was one of the best things that I could have experienced, because I really just got to reflect on myself and where I wanted to go without having to have all of that external noise. And I think that just set the direction for me for the next perhaps a couple of years as well, because Superposition Toronto was actually launched during the pandemic. And I think this would never have happened if I didn't get that chance to reflect on myself as well and what I wanted to do with my life.
I see. So, from your perspective, what are the biggest achievements of the organization?
I think, well, we've run a ton of different events over the past year or so, but probably the biggest achievement we've had is definitely our hackathon in August. It took a ton of planning, especially because we actually started planning only 3 months before, whereas usually hackathons of that scale take at least 6 months, if not like almost a year to plan. And with the hackathon, we were able to reach 1,100 signups in 63 different countries, as well as have a ton of different sponsors, $62,000 in prizes, and we actually gave away $600 of free software and technology to all of our attendees, as well as having a bunch of different workshops and activities. So it took a lot of planning, and it also allowed us to just expand our organization and just reach so many more individuals. So actually, back in June, before we released or announced the hackathon, we were actually at about a reach of 27 countries, which is already pretty great. But just in those short few months where we were promoting the hackathon, and while we were constantly working every single day, we saw that the number of people we were able to reach and the number of different countries we were reaching as well that were able to discover this hackathon and sign up for something to pursue their own interests and develop their own skills. Every single day, the number was just going up, and it was kind of like we almost didn't even realize it because we were so busy planning. But eventually, we were able to basically go from around 27 countries to 80 countries in just those 2 months. And I thought that was honestly insane. And aside from that, some interesting news is that we were actually featured in the Toronto Guardian just this morning. So that was super fun. And one of our other, I think probably our second biggest event aside from the hackathon was back in October of last year. We had a STEM University Programs panel, and that really just kickstarted us, because just from that event, the interest for that really just soared, and we had, I think, around 350 signups. And even without too much promotion, so many people were just interested and wanted to attend our event. And even though 350 in comparison to 1,100 is really nothing, I think that was also a pretty big milestone for us as well.
Wow, that's truly amazing. So, aside from Superposition Toronto, what other ventures are you pursuing?
Well, I'll take ventures as sort of, I guess, projects that I'm currently working on. So I think probably the most prominent at the moment is I started a moonshot project back in April, and it was essentially it was called AeroPure, and essentially what we were doing was we were taking polysaccharide aerogel beads. So aerogels are sort of like a nanomaterial, but essentially they're the world's lightest solids. They're incredibly porous, and it's super interesting. I would encourage you all to search up some videos as well. It's really cool. And we were using polysaccharide aerogel beads to essentially filter industrial and agricultural waste from polluted drinking water. And polluted water, or just drinking water, and the water crisis as a whole has been an issue that I've been pretty passionate about for many different, for quite a long time. And I've built a number of different projects related to that. But with this, we really just, I guess, took it to the next level. We contacted experts, and we also pitched it to judges and different investors as well. So we actually ended up getting $5,000 in funding just a couple weeks ago to further our project. And I think that's probably the most prominent. Something else, I guess, as another venture was a couple months ago, I was working on a project. It was called Here to Hear. And essentially it was an AI-backed platform that would allow children with hearing impairments learn English, because essentially, I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you do have the privilege of being able to hear, which is honestly, we don't really think about it, but it's incredibly difficult to learn a language without being able to hear the language itself. If you just see the words. And so we're trying to combat this sort of issue through that platform, and also at the same time develop a sort of community with other children who also face the same sort of issues by being able to communicate with them. And that one, we submitted it to a challenge from backed by Microsoft, actually. It was Microsoft's Imagine Cup Junior Challenge, and we ended up becoming one of the top 10 finalists globally for that as well.
That's awesome. So next question, how did you begin your role as a blockchain researcher and developer?
Yeah, so this one I think goes back quite a little bit. So I think back in 2019, I attended Hack North for the first time. That was back when things were in person. And there's a little bit checklist, or in one of the forums, where it was like, which technologies are you interested in? And I'd seen all the different technologies before, like AR, VR, AI, hardware, all of that. But one thing that I'd never actually seen up until that point, I think I was in grade 10, was blockchain, and had no clue what blockchain was. I had heard of Bitcoin back in, I think it was in grade 7, 2017, but I had no clue they were even related. And I asked my dad. He didn't really give a good explanation of what blockchain was either. And to be honest, like not many people do know what blockchain is. So I started to research a little bit more into it, because it was just so interesting that I'd never heard about what blockchain was. And yeah, I was attending this huge tech event essentially. And so I learned more about it, and eventually I used blockchain in another project I was doing. This one was in cybersecurity, and eventually I returned back to it around fall of last year. And that's when I really started to get interested into the field of blockchain. So first I started off with researching the limitations and different applications of it. I got super into the cryptography side and how all of the math was working. And eventually that got to a pretty advanced level. It got to like elliptic curve multiplication. It's pretty complicated stuff. But eventually I moved away from that, and I started developing dApps, or decentralized applications. And through here I was actually able to build things that were kind of related to my interests and creating change within the world and solving global problems. So some of the projects or dApps I built a land registration dApp, so essentially securing property rights. And I also had another hackathon project where we used blockchain, and that was essentially preventing nuclear cyber attacks by securing IoT devices. So I was able to connect blockchain and also using blockchain to solve issues, to solve issues related to, I guess, to solve social issues in the world. And that's really where I found my passion, I guess, because I know a lot of the times people think of blockchain and they think of like NFTs, they think of crypto. But for me, really, my interest in blockchain just lies in being able to use the technology and how it's the qualities of being transparent, immutable, and being able to secure different things and using those in applications like pharmaceuticals, female empowerment, and there are a ton of different applications of blockchain, even like in gun registries and all these different areas. And I think it's really just how I got started and how I'm still interested in it as well. And in terms of my roles, those are a whole different story, but it's essentially a lot of cold outreach, contacting a lot of different experts, and eventually create enough serendipity for yourself where for my my job as a blockchain developer, I was actually reached out to by a company, and they were looking for some developers, and I got an interview and I ended up getting the job. So that was for the developer role. And for research, I was looking to get into research as well in the field of blockchain because I had that developer side. And, you know, with R&D, you want to have like the research and the development side. So I just contacted different professors at universities who were doing pretty amazing work in the field of blockchain. And I ended up finding one professor at Waterloo who was willing to take me under his wing. And that's how I got my research role.
Very interesting. Also, I see that you are writing your own research paper at the moment under the guidance of a professor at the University of Waterloo. Could you describe your experience in this?
Yeah, so I guess I just described how I ended up finding the professor. But so far, it's still in the introductory stages, and it's really just exploratory research. So it's currently what I'm doing in my research role is essentially finding patterns within smart contracts over the years. So smart contract evolution and classifying them with Google's BigQuery, and essentially through this being able to see the different patterns in the progression through smart contracts over the years. And it's currently still in development, but I think it's a really interesting project because with exploratory research, you don't really know what you're looking for. I mean, a lot of the times I know with IBIAs or in school, you kind of know what's already going to happen. But with this, you're completely, you have no clue what's going to happen. And you really just have to analyze different aspects of it and see what you can pick up out of it. And I think that's just really the essence of science and technology.
Awesome. So you are currently 17. So that is quite young, and you definitely have a very promising future ahead of you. So what are some of the goals that you have for the future?
Yeah, so I think that's honestly a great question. I don't think about my future too much, honestly. I really just look at the short term because I know things are going to change. Things can change pretty much instantly, and I can't really foresee what's going to happen even in the next 4 months. But I think as of now, I've always wanted to go to the States for university. I've always just loved exploring, and I really want to see the outside world outside of Toronto as well. So definitely love to go to a tech university in the States and move there and possibly live there for the rest of my life. Not sure what the future holds. But eventually, given that one of my, I guess, personal philosophies or I guess my personal mission in life is that I really just want to be able to solve global issues and create global impact. And so what I eventually want to be able to do is to use technology to solve one of these issues in the world. So currently, my plan is to become a social tech entrepreneur, possibly live in Silicon Valley, and always, of course, being a role model to females, to young girls all around the world, because I mean, I think it's just become a part of me that, you know, I'm always going to be are you, me? But it's just a part of me that I just love promoting. And, I always want to, it's from, I guess, that feeling of why I even started Superposition Toronto in the first place. I wanted to create something that I wish I had. And so I just want to help other people as well to find themselves and find their own journeys.
That's amazing. And now the last question. Do you have any encouraging words or advice for young women interested in STEM?
Yeah, for sure. So I could speak all day on this topic for sure with, I guess, the advice that I've had to give myself and that the insights I've had over the past year or my life. But definitely know that you're not alone, because I know I felt alone so many times in my journey because I didn't have that support around me. And know that if you don't really have anyone around you right now who's interested in the same things that you are, or you don't know who to go to for support, just know that it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's just that you haven't found the right community of people that have those sorts of interests. And honestly, that's one of the best things you can have, a community of people who just support you and aren't like toxic or competitive. It's one of the best things you can have, a strong support system with people that care about you. And I guess another piece of advice I'd love to give is that don't try to be someone that you're not, to just try and fit into some sort of mold. So I know that's a lot of the times that's the case, especially when we feel so isolated ourselves. We try to fit in by being sometimes, especially with women in STEM, women in tech, we try to be more masculine to try and assert our dominance when that's not exactly ourselves. And we're just trying to almost prove that we do belong there by doing that. So for me, I still love spending money on clothes. I still love going outside and trying different foods. And I think that's part of who I am. And I can be this sort of person and also have that side to myself as well. And so along with that, staying true to yourself, making sure that, there will be different deterrents along the way, but ultimately that you believe in yourself and you believe in what you're able to accomplish and that there are no limits to what you can do.
That is incredibly inspiring, and I'm sure that the young women listening to this episode that are interested in STEM will truly appreciate your words and advice. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your story. Unfortunately, this is the end of this episode and our time with Samantha, yet happily not the end of her story. Thank you to all the listeners for tuning in to Tell My Story, and don't forget to come back for the next episode so you can hear us from our upcoming guests.